Okay, I'm going to record this.
Okay.
So that was a voice saying that it's going to record this meeting, because there were a couple of people who wanted to come but couldn't.
Okay.
One of them's gone to bed.
Oh.
So
juggling all these time zones is not easy.
Yeah, I know. I've got 2 different times now, but even so, there are some people who still are not able to come. But I'll give this a go. At least you've managed to get here. I've caught 1 fish, so that's a start. Right. So, well, what we're doing this month is looking at some Shakespeare ideas, and what age are your students?
So last year I was teaching grade 4 to grade 8, so like 8 to 14.
Okay.
Because the drama teacher who's normally here, she was on maternity leave, so I replaced her last year. And then this year, the principal was really happy with what I did in drama, so she asked if I could keep the grade 4s. So I still have the grade 4s, which is the little guys. So they're 8 and 9.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting because in our meeting last week, we had Josie and somebody else or a couple of people who work with quite young kids, you know, sort of like 4 and 5 year olds.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So even, 8 and 9 seems quite grown up in comparison.
Yeah, and unfortunately, COVID has also affected that they were noticing that the 2-year disruption, they don't have the same social skills and ability to work in a group that they had in the past. So we're finding that the grade 4s are really, their skills are sort of at a grade 1 or 2 level instead of at the normal level they would be in grade 4. So it's interesting to see all these consequences popping up.
So in some respects, thinking of what you might do with younger kids might be helpful as well. So yeah, that's what I've got on my agenda. But is there anything in particular that you'd like to ask about, or any particular themes or questions that come to mind for you at the moment?
I don't think so. I mean, it's always good to hear what everybody else is doing and sort of get ideas. So we've just been playing with the green screen recently. So we're doing a little bit of oral storytelling. So they have to choose a story that they want to read, and then we're working on the gestures and the characterization, so trying to take on the different characters in the story as we're telling the story. So they've been recording their stories in front of the green screen as they sort of become confident and ready to tell them. So we're also working on stage presence, the blocking, and making sure that, we're not moving around too much, but also not standing like boards on the middle of the stage. So they've been having a lot of fun with that. And of course, I have fun telling them stories. So I'll kind of start every lesson with the story that I tell them, and then just to role model some of the skills that I want them to show. Then they've been practicing in small groups to kind of perform their stories as well.
Well, that sounds great. I think it seems to me that storytelling is quite an important part of education and the arts in North America, maybe more than
really?
Yeah, maybe more than it is here. I did a bit of storytelling myself a few years ago, and I took something into schools, and there was a kind of upsurge of interest in the UK. And I did a lot of research, and I found that most of the books I found were from Canada or America on storytelling.
Okay.
So, and
well,
it's
in Canada, it definitely falls into the Indigenous culture, but also in the French Canadian culture. Storytelling is a big part of that community.
yeah, and for good reason. They've got some great stories to tell. Yeah, and obviously you've got that mix of cultures that's really kind of like integral to the population in schools and generally. Okay, so well, if I tell you, if I pass on to you some of these activities, and then if you feel like asking any questions or talking about how it might apply to you, that would be great.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I explained to everybody last week, because I'm basically going through the same sort of material, but I may diverge into other things.
Okay.
Yeah, so I explained that I came to Shakespeare quite late in my life, in that when I was at school, Shakespeare seemed to be just something really boring that was in books and had lots of difficult words, you know. And I think that's probably something that an appearance that it makes to a lot of people. And even after I started running my own theatre company, I used to stay clear of Shakespeare, and I used to do all sorts of other stuff. But I never thought it was for me. And then I finally got into Shakespeare because I was asked to do some training with some teachers. And I suddenly found that I had to give myself a crash course in Shakespeare's plays. And as a result, I actually became really interested, and I shared my ideas, but I also took away lots of ideas that were already being used by this organization. So during a sort of 3 or 4 year period, I was doing a lot of Shakespeare work. And in this country, there was a development probably about in the last 10 years where universities were working with the Royal Shakespeare Company and also the National Theatre, and also obviously the Globe Theatre in London, were all developing their own kind of education schemes for opening Shakespeare out to young people. And I think what became apparent about it is that the crucial part of Shakespeare is what we've been talking about, really, which is storytelling. And if you think of Shakespeare as a storyteller, then it kind of opens things out much more into a way that you can really involve kids. So I've got a whole collection of games, and some of them are warm-ups and some of them are more kind of like developed strategies that take a bit of time. For example, there's something called ghosting, which is about approaching scripts and finding ways to bring those to life, which we can have a look at. We also played a game called Family Portraits. Do you know that game?
Okay. It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if I remember how to play it.
So basically in the original game, you divide the kids up into groups and you explain to them that they're going to make a photograph of a family, just like you might see a portrait of a family on a mantelpiece or on a desk. And usually you would see maybe some parents and some kids, maybe some grandchildren, or maybe some older relatives, maybe a dog. So there's all these different members of a family. And if you've got access to some images, you can show them things like a Victorian portrait where everybody was very formal. And they had to stand still for a long time because the camera had to open its lens for a few seconds and everybody had to stay still for that period of time. So then you explain to them that you're actually going to give them a theme for each of the family portraits. So it's not just an ordinary family. And so it might be, for example, that the first family portrait you'd like them to make would be a very sleepy family. or it might be a very overexcited family, or it might be a scientific family. And then you can go really into fantasy. So you could have a family of dinosaurs, or a family of cakes, or anything that you can think of. And what you then, so you give them the name of a family. So you might start off with something like, some popular ones are a rock star family. So you say, right, in 10 seconds, I'd like you in your group to make a photograph of a rock star family. And there should be like parents and kids and different generations. Okay, off you go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you get them to freeze. And hopefully you've got some playing guitar and some playing drums. And what you're then looking out for is that they are thinking about working together. So you might get some people who are like low down, like a little baby playing drums, and you might have a father with a big guitar or something. So then what I would do once the groups are frozen is to pick out some of the different photos that they've made and point out things that they've done well. So things you would be looking for would be that they had paid attention to each other. So they've got a good contrast of ages in the photo. And also using physical levels so that you've got some low down, some medium height. They're thinking of using different shapes and so on. But don't spend too long on that. Then the idea is to keep it quite fast moving. And you could have a family of aliens, or a family of, or you could have the underwater family. Or if you were doing a story, you could take characters from that story. So we were talking about the Red Riding Hood family, So you might have, the woodcutter and Red Riding Hood and the wolf, and Granny, or in bed Granny. So that's quite nice, because you can explain to them that you want them to try and come up with a mixture of characters in their family. So it's all about, you were saying about how they were lacking social skills, or they were a bit behind. It's about getting them to work together in a structure. And because you've got that structure of a theme and time, it works quite well, because it gives them something, parameters to work within. So yeah, it's a bit difficult for us to do this together because there's only 2 of us, or only 1 of you. But we did have a go at doing it online, because I wasn't sure whether it would work or not, because what you can't do is you can't really have, like, if you made an image of a wolf, I wouldn't know whether you were being a baby wolf or a grandparent wolf, It wouldn't really make any difference. So we kind of ignored that aspect of it and just concentrated on having fun with the characters.
And different characters,
yeah, and it worked fine, so you could do it actually with a larger group. You could just call out a theme and see how many different types of characters they could come up with as a group.
So I have 17 students in my class. Would you have all 17 try to be in the portrait, or would you maybe do 1 portrait and 1 half watches, and then they swap? Or
is this online or live?
Live. Yeah,
face to face. So if it was face to face, what I would do is, first of all, so normally the best thing to do is in small groups. So I would say no more than 5, really.
Okay.
Because after 5, it becomes a bit difficult for them to kind of relate to each other. And I would take 1 group and say, okay, can I have some volunteers, or could I have this group here? And let's have a go just with you. so we're going to see how quickly you can make these different families and give them a couple to do. So you can say, right, first of all, the dinosaur family, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now the horror story family. No, so whatever it might be. And so you get them to move through things quite quickly. So they're not thinking about it too much and not thinking about, being embarrassed in front of the others. But you could.
Yes, I don't have that problem with my students.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. So, well, then during that time with that one group, you can then point out the things like levels and thinking of different ages and trying to get a range of characters. So really you are modeling it with the one group, and then I would divide them up into groups of 4 or 5, roughly speaking.
Okay.
You could even do it with a 3, depending, I don't know how 17 divides up. You'd probably have a couple of groups of 5 and a couple of groups of 4 or something like that, depending on how you divide it up. I'm not very good at the maths. So anyway, you know what I mean. If you do it with a large group, it's much harder for them to communicate and come up with different characters and to do it within the time. And some of them could kind of like hide behind others in a way, whereas if there's only 4 or 5 of you, you've all got to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that works really well. And the way it relates to Shakespeare is that you could get them to do a few random ones like that to break the ice. And then you use it as a way to introduce some of the characters from Shakespeare's stories. So you could say, for example, in a lot of Shakespeare's stories, there are magical characters. And in those days, people really did believe in magic, even more than they might do today. And so, for example, in lots of the stories, there were fairies, but they weren't like the Peter Pan Tinkerbell fairies that you might imagine. They were often quite cheeky, mischievous, or evil characters who like to play tricks on other people. So let's see if you can make me the Shakespeare fairy family, the mischievous sprites family. Okay, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So then you could do things like the brave hero family, or the lords and ladies family, that sort of thing. So it's just a way of introducing characters, different stereotypes and different characters from plays. Equally, as I always say with all these Shakespeare activities, you can use them for any story whatsoever, So it's a way to introduce characters. So you might play it as a game where you introduce the characters and then you tell the story afterwards. So
I was thinking this might even be a good thing with the oral storytelling that we're doing, because I'm trying to get them to take on the persona of the various characters in their story, and that when they change to different parts of their story, that they change the way they're standing and moving to suit that character. So this could be, we could go through each of the kids. Okay, what's your story and who are the characters? Okay, let's do a family portrait of that story. And I think it could be really neat for helping them to get that sort of to get into character and really feel what that character would be like.
Yeah, it's a bit like the prologue in Shakespeare. It's a bit like, you could have, as you say, you could have a photo at the beginning where we see however many people are telling the story, a number of different characters from that story. And maybe we don't, either they could say, yes, I am the Wicked Witch and I am the woodcutter, or they could just make the different characters and then we could find out later on who those characters are.
No, that's what I was thinking, that they could kind of talk about who the characters are in their story, and then okay, make that family portrait, and then okay, well, who are you and who do you think they are, and sort of look at, because that's something that I find at this age they have, some of them struggle with being silly. Some of them struggle with sort of letting go, and I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that they're shy. I think it's that they haven't had experience doing that.
Yeah.
I think it's more that, you know, perhaps their parents are quite serious, sort of straightforward people, and don't do silly things very much at home. So they're not used to sort of letting themselves get lost in sort of that seeing. So I think this could help with that.
Well, now that you said that, it's made me think of another completely different activity that could help your students. So I've got on my screen a collection of different activities that I used to use in these workshops. And one of them was based on the theories of somebody called Rudolf Laban. Okay. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
Okay, so he was a dancer, and he was a teacher. And what he did was he created a way of notating dance, because people were choreographing dance and they didn't really have a good way of writing down what the moves were or how they should move at any one point. So to do this, it meant that he had to analyze the different kind of movements that are made in dance. And as a result, he came up with a way of classifying these different movements. And a number of theatre companies, including the Royal National Theatre and Shakespeare, the Royal Shakespeare Company, used these as a basis for creating characters. And they work really, really well. So I'm going to go through it with you. So I'm just going to refer to my notes as well, just to remember them. Yeah. So you can do, what I would normally do is get them in a circle, and you explain that you're going to teach them about different ways of moving that could help them to create different characters. And we're going to look at different qualities of movement. And the first two qualities we'll look at are light and heavy. Okay. And I'd normally demonstrate this when we're standing in the circle, just by moving a hand and saying, can you move your hand in a light way? You could try this as well. So can you move your hand in any direction in a light way? And you can talk about images, you know, it might be like a feather floating, or a balloon. Yeah. So you get them to do that, and maybe they could use their other arm as well. And the idea is that you're slowly tricking them into moving their bodies, you know. So you start off with you start off with the hand, and you know, slowly they'll kind of like get into it a little bit. And then you say, okay, that's light. Now the opposite to that would be heavy. So can you move your arm now in a heavy way? So it's made of lead. All right. So your arm is moving. It's really, it's
so let it dangle around.
Hardly move it, you know. So you introduce those qualities. Those are the first two. And then, so after doing that, you would then get them to move around in the space using those different qualities. So can they move in a light way in the space? Can they, you know, moving around lightly, light on their feet? Anything will do, you know, everything is acceptable. And then you could clap your hands and say, now heavy, and just watch what they do, and they'll be moving heavily.
They have to switch,
might be thumping around. So what we're doing here, you know, you can already imagine that a light character could almost be a fairy in the woods. A heavy character could be a monster.
A giant.
A giant, Okay, so that's the first two aspects, and they're all nice and easy to understand. So the next ones are fast and slow. So again, you can get them into a circle, and you can get them to move, right, move your arm in a fast way, and now move your arms in a very slow way. And then they can do the same thing in the space. So moving quickly and moving as slowly as they can. Actually, I missed one out.
And I really like that last question. I like that last question that you said also. What character do you think would move in this way, and sort of brainstorming what kinds of characters? I think that's a really neat connection for them to make.
Yeah. So what you'll see, I'm leading towards, once you've taught them all the different aspects, then you've then got a movement vocabulary for creating characters. So I'll go through the rest of them. There's only 8 altogether. So we've got light and heavy, got slow and fast. It doesn't really matter what order you teach them, actually, but this is quite a good order. And then you've got direct and indirect.
So that's a tricky one.
So yeah, I would now be in the space for these. So I'm making a bit of space. So direct is like, you know where you're going, whereas indirect would be, you know, moving around in different ways, different directions, and so on, you know. So you've got those, and then we've got 2 more, so we've got we've got light and heavy, direct and indirect. Actually, that's it. It's just those 6. There are others as well, but in these workshops, we're just going to use those ones. If you have too many, it becomes a bit difficult to remember them all as well. Now, what you do is, first of all, I'll explain to you that, so Laban identified, I'm reading this, by the way, he identified 3 categories of movement: weight, time, and space. So weight is like heavy or light, time is fast or slow, and space is direct or indirect. And you could have different gradations of these as well, obviously. So you don't have to be really heavy, you know, you could be quite heavy, and you could be quite slow or quite fast. So the fun bit is when you then start to combine them. And this is how I would recommend that you teach it. You sit half the group down, and if you've got 17, that's a good number. So you've got 8 or 9 standing up. And then you give them a combination of the movements. And I'm actually going to put these into the chat window so that you can read them. Let me just paste them in there. So you should see them come up now. So if I go through these, so first of all, I would say, right, these 9 people standing up, I'm going to give you some different ways of moving. And by the way, you don't need to tell them what the names are, like float and glide. Those were Laban's terms. You could use those later if you wanted. So you say to them, right, when I clap my hands, I want you to try and move around the space in a light way, slowly and indirectly. Okay. So how might that look? It might be so light, slow, but indirect. So you're not going in
so kind of floating around.
Light, slow, yeah, it's like a balloon, isn't it? So now immediately you've got characters. So you say, what you do is you ask the audience, who will be laughing hopefully, but you also say to them, you know, can you see any types of characters there? So they might say, yeah, a deep sea diver or a spaceman, or they might come up with lots of others. So then what is interesting is if you, with that same group, if you look at the second one there, you change one aspect. So you say to them, okay, this time I want you to move lightly, slowly, but directly, and see what difference that makes. So let's just try that out. So it's light, slow, but direct. Light.
So it's like, direct. I'm thinking like cross-country skiing or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I was going to say ice skating.
Yeah.
The other one. So what's great about this is that you give them a vocabulary, and it means that, for example, you want a kid to be more like a monster. Instead of having to say, you know, can you be a fierce monster? You could say to them, can you move heavily, quickly, and indirectly, and let's see what that makes, you know.
No, that's a great. I think it makes it more clear for them.
Yeah. And it means it gives them kind of a vocabulary of movement. So, for example, with Shakespeare's fairies, you know, you probably be light, fast, and indirect. Light, fast, and indirect. Light, fast, and indirect. You know, and a monster could be probably heavy, slow, and direct. You know.
Yep.
So yeah, and this could take you know a whole lesson easily, and you could So let me get your feedback on all of that, because I've talked and explained it. What do you think about it?
I think that's great, and I like the idea of having that language of saying, okay, so I think your character needs to move a little bit more slowly or a little bit more quickly, or you need to be lighter or heavier. I think that's great. After I do this with them, then they will have an understanding of that, which I think will be really helpful for them, because you're right, they're not always able to bring to life what you're trying to explain to them. And this way you've got sort of very specific instructions that they can go with, which is good.
Yeah, great. Now there's one more bit of magic that comes with this. And the magic is that you can transfer this into working with a script and ways of reading a script. So what you do is you get them all in a circle again, and you say to them, right, we're going to have a go at moving our arms in one of the ways that we've been playing around with. So the first way we're going to do it, I want you to move your arms into the center of the circle in a heavy, fast, and direct way. So it's heavy, fast, direct, heavy, fast. And you can see why that movement was called punching.
Yeah.
On the list there. So, and you get a few people to do that. And then you can say so let's say I would get, you three over there, can you show us your punching movement after you've done it with everybody? And so they're going. Yeah. And then you can say to everybody else, what kind of characters might they be, or what kind of emotion might they have? They're making those kind of movements. And then we could do something contrasting. Can they move their arms in a light, slow and indirect? Light, slow and indirect. Light, slow and indirect. And again, you know, how does it read? Then, then you give them a line of script.
Okay.
And the one that we used to have in our workshops, well, there's a number of ones that you could have, but for example, in Romeo and Juliet, there is a line which goes, a plague on both your houses. Have you heard it before? Yeah, a plague on both your houses. So.
Yes, in Canada, every single person reads Romeo and Juliet in grade 10.
Great. Okay.
I don't know why, but that's what we do.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's a start. So then you teach them that line, maybe stick it up on the wall so that they can read it. And then you get them to say the line by punching each word. So we go back to that punching movement. And so they're going, plague on both your houses. Right? And so you get them all to do that, and that's, you know, quite funny. And then this sounds weird, but it really works. You get 3 of them to do it, and they'll be going, a plague on both your houses. And you say to the others who might be saying that, and they might say, oh, some angry people, some soldiers, or whatever it might be. And now what you want them to do is to say the line again, but imagine they are making the movements. So it goes something like, a plague on both your houses. But suddenly you've got emotion there in their speech. So what you've done is you've made their acting really big. And this is something that actors will often do anyway, is to make their acting really big and then bring it down, you know, especially when you're learning about acting. And especially with kids, because what they tend to do is to understate rather than to overstate.
Yeah.
So then you've got them going, a plague on both your houses. And you can ask the audience what they think about, you know, the characters who might be saying that. Then you teach them, let's say you go back to the slow, just reading this from the list, slow, light, and indirect. And the way that I explain this is that it's as though they are stroking a giant pussycat. Okay, slow, light, and indirect.
Yeah.
Slow, light, and indirect. Then, once they've got that, can they say the same line, but making those movements? So I'd like you to try that. A plague on both your houses with a slow, light, and indirect movement for each one.
A plague on both your houses.
Yeah, great. And now I'll do it for you so you can see what it looks like.
Okay.
A plague on both your houses.
Which almost comes across as being sarcastic.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. So, and again, once they've got that, and you can choose a different 3 to demonstrate it, you can then get them all to do it, but without the movements, but still feeling it. So, a plague on both your houses. And it just goes to show how you can say, you know, the same sentence could still have the same meaning, but it's said in such a different way. And actually, you know, that sarcastic, understated way could be more powerful than shouting it. A plague on both your houses. A plague on both your houses. You know. And then each of those movements can be used. So light, fast, and indirect. Light, fast, and indirect. This one, we used to say it was like tickling the pussycat. Okay. So, light, fast, and indirect. Light, fast, and indirect. Light, fast.
So as opposed to the slow,
yeah. Instead of a slow one. So light, fast, indirect. A plague on both your houses. Can you try that?
Okay, now I'm picturing like a jester character.
Yeah.
He's like jumping around.
So, can you try that out?
Okay. All right. A plague on both your houses.
Yeah, exactly. and then try it without the movements, but with still the same impetus.
Okay. A plague on both your houses.
Yeah, it's kind of cheeky, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's quite nice about this is that you might use some of these without really knowing what you were going to come up with. And you could just throw them in quite randomly and decide that actually that line was going to be said sarcastically, or cheekily, or whatever it might be. So with this one, it's something you can teach. You know, it will take at least a lesson to teach it, and then you would need to come back to it at different times. But it's always there, and you can put the list on the wall, you know, so that they can see the different combinations.
How do you spell the fellow's last name?
Let me just get a book to show you.
Okay. Okay.
Laban. This is a great book, and it kind of goes into it in incredible detail, as you can see. So it was designed as a very technical way for dancers to learn about movement, but also it evolved into what they call Laban notation.
Okay.
So this is how you would notate different movements.
Wow.
In a dance. I've never really used that at all. I don't know it, don't know how to use it. But just that, you know, just those aspects of movement are incredibly useful, and they could help with giving some guidelines to those kids to create characters. So that is Laban, Rudolf Laban. Highly recommended. Another thing that we did on Tuesday last week, which we've got time for, because I'm going to leave the ghosting. Maybe I'll explain the ghosting, because I think you will find it very useful, actually. Yeah, I'll explain that. Even though we can't really do it. So the idea is you demonstrate this with a piece of script where you've got two characters. So here I've got Miranda and Prospero from The Tempest. Okay. So Miranda was the teenage daughter of Prospero, but it could be any character. So it could be Romeo and Juliet, or it could be Laertes and, you know, whoever really. So you take a short extract of script. So what is ghosting? It is where each actor has a ghost who is going to read the script for him or her.
Okay.
So if I was teaching this, and I couldn't do this with your young kids, not with this script, but I could do it maybe with the teenagers. In fact, because it's got a teenage character in there, it's quite good to do with them. What I'll do is, again, I'm going to put the script, that extract of script, into the chat. And let me just grab it. Here we go. I don't know how it will come out in the chat. Might not come out in the right order. Let's see. Oh no, it's good actually. Well, here it is. Looks good. So can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'd say, can I have two volunteers to be the characters, Miranda and Prospero? Just stand them next to each other. Everybody else is the audience. And can I have two characters to be, two volunteers to be the ghosts? And they need to be able to have a go at reading some Shakespeare, okay? So by the way, this can be really good if you've got a student who's not very good at reading, but loves to act. So you could pair them up with somebody who is good at reading. So there's Miranda and there's Prospero. Miranda's ghost reads out Miranda's line to her in a fairly neutral voice, breaking it up into short phrases that make sense. Okay. So if I was the ghost, I might say, if by your art, and then the actor just repeats that. If by your art, the ghost reads the next bit, dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar. You have put the wild waters in this roar. Allay them. Okay. So first of all, it doesn't matter if they don't get the full meaning, because that is going to come out as we go through the process. So you go through that whole script. So then Prospero's ghost reads out the next bit. Be collected, Miranda. Be collected, Miranda. There's no harm done. There's no harm done. So they go through the speech, and the great thing about it is that the actors are not holding a piece of paper. So they can concentrate on the words, and slowly they can begin to concentrate on their movements. On their movements as well. Now I'm just going to go to my notes on ghosting so I get the order of this right. Here we go. So they should act as though they're listening to each of the other characters. So when Miranda is saying her lines, then Prospero is listening to her. Now, then you repeat the whole process. Nothing changes except that the actors have to try and change the words into modern language.
Okay.
So if they don't know the meaning, then you can ask the audience to help to see if anybody can guess. And obviously, if they can't, you can point them in the right direction. So the ghost says, if by your art, dearest father, and the actor might say, if in the way you do things, Dad, you have put the wild waters in this roar. You've made the sea so splashy. Allay them. Stop it. Okay. Now that might take 5 minutes, because the actor might say, well, what do you mean by your art? What does that mean? And you say to the audience, what do you think it means? By the way you do things, okay, or by your talents. And obviously you can explain a little bit about the characters, because Prospero was a magician, a wizard, and Miranda is his 14-year-old daughter, and they lived together on this magical island where they were shipwrecked many years ago. And in the story, Prospero has created a big magical storm which causes another shipwreck. Okay, so you're gradually introducing them to the story. So then you go on to the second character, onto second line, Prospero, and the ghost says, be collected, Miranda. Pull yourself together, Miranda. There's no harm done. It'll all be okay. It'll be cool, So do you get the idea? So they're translating the original into what the meaning might be behind the lines. So ask me about anything that you don't get so far about that.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah. So there's
it's nice to have them do that creative thinking also, of trying to figure out what do you think it might mean.
Yeah.
Rather than just explaining it to them. It's nice to have the chance to kind of puzzle it out.
Yeah. So by now, the actors have repeated the line, Shakespeare's words once. They've translated the words with the help of the audience and maybe the teacher. Now you say to them, right, actors, the ghosts are going to step out of the scene and you're going to try and play the scene on your own. Just remembering what you can from what was said between the characters. And the actors go, oh, blimey, what am I going to do now? But actually, you'd be amazed, what they can pull out of a hat if they have a go at it. And so you get them to try and tell the story again, to act out being the characters. And if they miss some lines, it doesn't really matter, or they might get them in the wrong order. So they might say, oh, Dad, you've created this storm. Can you please stop it? And then Prospero says, it's cool, Miranda, pull yourself together,
It's fine.
So what you start to get here is that the actors will start to move and react to each other, okay? And you encourage that. So you can say to them, you can move around now, you can look at each other, you can respond to each other. Okay, so again, this whole thing could take half an hour. And the final stage is where you invite the ghosts back once they've gone through this whole thing again. And the ghosts read the lines, which by now the actors are much more familiar with. And the actors have to play them in the way that they played the modern language. And what's great about this is that their bodies have innately learned the meaning of the words and the movements. So now they'll be saying, if by your art, dearest father, and using, Miranda will maybe thinking more about being a teenager. If by your art, dearest father, you put these waters in a wild roar, allay them, And Miranda is, Prospero is saying, be collected, Miranda. There's no harm done. So what you'll find is by this stage, they're beginning to look at each other, and you will hopefully naturally get a round of applause from the audience at the end of that scene. So the great thing about this, as I'm kind of repeating a bit, but is that the actors don't have to hold a script. They're not fixated on the words. They're fixated on the meaning of the words. They can think about their movements and they can think about their characters. They don't have to remember what comes next because the ghosts are going to tell them. And as Josie pointed out, you're involving double the amount of people in the scene. You've got the ghosts as well. So you could demonstrate this, and then what you could do is, if you were working, it could be any script or even a story maybe, you could divide the class into groups and give them each a section of the play or the story and see if they could do their own ghosting of that particular scene and then bring them all back together to show what they've made. So that is ghosting.
Well, there you go.
And it's something that you could then, occasionally come back to in rehearsals or even storytelling. How does it appeal to you in terms of your groups?
Oh, it sounds great. I really enjoy we do Shakespeare with grade 6s, and it was interesting because I did some sonnets with them. So I had them recite sonnets in partners. And then I found these dialogues between characters who were gossiping about the plot of a play, of each Shakespearean play, but it was in modern language. They were mad at me. They wanted it to be in the Shakespearean language. They didn't want the modern language. So I think this could be a really fun activity to do with them,
Yeah.
because they're getting the chance to explore that Shakespearean language and really get to understand the meaning of the words, which I think is really a very cool activity for them to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. That is our hour. And
sounds good.
Yeah.
I have a student teacher, so I have to go and find her.
Fine. You better get on with your day then.
Yeah.
And
well, her teaching major is history. So
okay.
She's a little bit nervous about doing drama with me, but I told her she's going to have a blast.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
All right then, Sarah.
Okay,
Jane.
well, it's really nice to see you. Thank you for sharing those ideas. I really appreciate it.
No problem. And
okay, have a nice day.
See you on Facebook.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Sounds good. Bye.